Long before the country we now call Nigeria had a name, long before borders were drawn on maps, this land was already alive with people, stories, and discovery. Across wide savannas in the north and thick green forests in the south, early communities learned how to live with nature. They farmed the land, fished in rivers, hunted in the wild, and slowly built villages that would grow into powerful cultures. Life was not easy, but it was full of creativity, courage, and cooperation. One of the earliest known civilizations in this region was the culture we now call Nok. Beginning around 1000 BC, the Nok people created beautiful terracotta sculptures, carefully shaped figures of men, women, and children with detailed hairstyles and expressive faces. For adults, these sculptures reveal advanced artistic skill and social organization. For children, they show that even thousands of years ago, people loved art and storytelling just like we do today. The Nok were also among the earliest known iron smelters in West Africa. They discovered how to heat iron ore and shape it into tools for farming and hunting. This was a major technological breakthrough, helping communities grow stronger and more organized. As centuries passed, different groups spread across the land. They formed clans and villages, each with its own customs and beliefs. Elders passed down history through oral storytelling, teaching younger generations about bravery, wisdom, and respect. Families worked together, and community life was very important. Children learned from watching adults farm, cook, weave, and craft tools, while adults relied on shared labor to survive and prosper. Cooperation was the foundation of society. Trade also began to develop. People exchanged goods like salt, cola nuts, grains, pottery, and later iron tools. Rivers such as the Niger and Benue became natural highways connecting distant communities. For adults, this shows early economic networks forming across the region. For children, it means people made friends far away and shared what they had. Trade did not only move goods, it spread ideas, languages, and traditions. Spiritual beliefs were deeply connected to nature. Many communities believed that rivers, forests, and ancestors had spiritual importance. Ceremonies were held to celebrate harvests, births, and seasons. These traditions helped people understand their world and feel connected to one another. Respect for elders and ancestors became an important value that still influences Nigerian cultures today. By the time the first millennium AD was ending, the foundations of later kingdoms were already in place. Farming techniques had improved. Iron tools were common. Trade networks were expanding. Social systems were becoming more structured. Though we do not have written records from this early period, archaeology and oral traditions tell us that ancient Nigeria was not a blank space in history. It was a land of innovation, artistry, and strong communities. So when we look at modern Nigeria today, we are not looking at a young story. We are looking at a civilization built on thousands of years of human effort, creativity, and resilience. Ancient Nigeria reminds both adults and children that great nations do not appear overnight. They grow slowly, shaped by the hands and hearts of the people who came before. Between the years 1000 and 1800, the land we now call Nigeria was home to powerful kingdoms, brilliant leaders, and thriving cities. This was a time when trade routes stretched across deserts and forests, when scholars studied under mosque lamps, when kings ruled from grand palaces, and when communities built systems of government that were organized, creative, and strong. Long before colonial rule, this region was already a center of wealth, culture, and influence in Africa. In the north, across the dry grasslands near the edge of the Sahara, the mighty Kanem-Bornu Empire rose to power. For centuries, it controlled trade routes that crossed the desert, connecting West Africa to North Africa and beyond. Caravans of camels carried salt, gold, leather goods, and books. Islam became an important part of life, shaping law, education, and leadership. For adults, this shows political organization and international diplomacy. For children, imagine long lines of camels walking across golden sand, carrying treasures and knowledge from faraway lands. Kanem-Bornu became known not just for strength, but for scholarship and stability. As centuries passed, the Hausa city-states such as Kano, Katsina, and Zaria grew into busy commercial centers. These were not small villages, but walled cities filled with markets, mosques, craftsmen, and scholars. Trade flourished. Indigo-dyed cloth, leather goods, and grains were exchanged. Education thrived in Islamic schools, where students memorized and studied religious and legal texts. The cities competed at times, but they also shared language, culture, and commerce, creating a vibrant northern civilization. In the early 1800s, a religious reformer named Usman Dan Fodio led a movement that transformed the region. His efforts led to the creation of the vast Sokoto Caliphate, one of the largest empires in West Africa. It united many Hausa states under a centralized Islamic government. For adults, it represented political restructuring and religious reform. For children, it was like many small kingdoms joining together to become one large family under shared rules and beliefs. In the southwest, deep in the forests and open plains, Yoruba civilization reached remarkable heights. The sacred city of Ile-Ife was considered the spiritual birthplace of the Yoruba people. According to tradition, it was where the world began. Archaeologists have discovered extraordinary bronze and terracotta sculptures there, so realistic that early Europeans could hardly believe they were African creations. These artworks showed kings, nobles, and everyday people with incredible detail and skill, proving a high level of artistic mastery. From Ile-Ife, power expanded to the mighty Oyo Empire. Oyo became one of the most powerful military states in West Africa. Its cavalry, soldiers on horseback, allowed it to control trade routes and defend its territory. But Oyo was not ruled by a king alone. Councils and checks on royal power ensured balance in leadership. For adults, this demonstrates complex political systems. For children, it shows that even kings needed advisors and rules to guide them. In the southeast, a different kind of system flourished. The kingdom of Nri operated largely through spiritual authority rather than military conquest. The Eze Nri, or king, was respected as a religious leader who maintained harmony and peace. Many Igbo communities practiced republican systems where decisions were made by councils of elders rather than by a single ruler. This system valued discussion, consensus, and shared responsibility. For adults, it highlights political diversity. For children, it teaches that leadership can mean guiding people wisely rather than commanding them. Across these regions, trade linked societies together. Salt from the desert, cola nuts from the forests, cloth, ivory, and metal goods moved between communities. Markets became places not only of buying and selling, but of storytelling and cultural exchange. Music, festivals, and oral history strengthened identity. Families passed down traditions from generation to generation. By 1800, the land was far from isolated or undeveloped. It was home to empires, city-states, artists, scholars, warriors, and farmers. Political systems ranged from centralized monarchies to community-based republics. Religions and traditions shaped daily life. Economic networks stretched across Africa. For both adults and children, this period teaches an important lesson. Long before foreign powers arrived, the region that would become Nigeria was already rich in knowledge, governance, creativity, and strength. These kingdoms laid the foundation for the nation's later history, proving that greatness did not begin with colonial maps. It was already there, built by African hands and guided by African minds.
We require access to the interior. His Majesty's company will pay handsomely for safe passage.
Beginning in the 1400s, the world around the land we now call Nigeria began to change in ways no one could have imagined. Along the Atlantic coast, powerful African kingdoms were already trading goods such as pepper, ivory, cloth, and gold with neighboring regions. Then, new ships appeared on the horizon. They came from Europe, first led by Portuguese explorers searching for trade routes and new opportunities. At the beginning, contact was mostly about exchange. African traders offered goods from the interior, and Europeans brought textiles, metal items, and other products from abroad. Coastal cities grew busier, and communication between continents slowly increased. But over time, trade shifted towards something far more painful and destructive. European demand for labor in the Americas created the transatlantic slave trade. Millions of Africans were captured, sold, and transported across the ocean under terrible conditions. Some were taken during wars between African states, others were kidnapped or betrayed, and many families were torn apart forever. For adults, this period represents a global system driven by profit and power, one that reshaped economies and politics on several continents. For children, it is important to understand gently but truthfully that many people were forced to leave their homes and never returned, and that this caused deep sadness and lasting harm. Coastal areas of what is now Nigeria became connected to this Atlantic network. Ports grew active, and some local rulers became involved in the trade, believing it would strengthen their states or protect them from rivals. European forts and trading posts were built along parts of the West African coast, though most control inland remained with African kingdoms. The trade changed relationships between communities. Conflicts increased in some regions because captives could be sold for goods and weapons. Societies that had once focused mainly on farming and local trade now faced new pressures tied to global demand. The Middle Passage, the journey across the Atlantic, was harsh and deadly. Many captives did not survive the voyage. Those who did were forced into labor in plantations far away from their homeland. Despite this suffering, African culture survived in powerful ways. Music, language, religion, and traditions traveled with the people and helped shape cultures in the Americas and the Caribbean. This painful chapter also shows the strength and resilience of African communities, whose heritage could not be erased. By the early 1800s, attitudes in Europe began to shift. Movements to abolish slavery gained strength. Britain outlawed the slave trade in 1807 and later pressured other nations to do the same. However, ending the trade did not immediately end suffering, and illegal trading continued for years. Gradually, economic focus turned to other goods, especially palm oil, which was used in European factories during the Industrial Revolution. This new, legitimate trade reduced slave exports but increased European interest in deeper involvement along the coast. For both adults and children, this era teaches important lessons about greed, power, suffering, and resilience. It shows how global connections can bring both opportunity and harm. It reminds us that while European contact opened new trade networks and cultural exchanges, it also caused immense human tragedy through slavery. The effects of this period shaped political boundaries, economic systems, and social relations in the centuries that followed. By the end of the 1800s, European powers were no longer satisfied with coastal trade alone. They wanted direct political control of African territories. The stage was set for colonial rule, and the next chapter in the history of Nigeria would be written under foreign authority.
According to this map, the artifact is just beyond those ridges. We ride now if we want to beat them to it.
During the 1800s, European interest in Africa began to change. What started as coastal trade slowly turned into political control. In the land we now call Nigeria, British merchants first focused on palm oil, which was in high demand for factories during the Industrial Revolution. Trading companies grew powerful, especially the Royal Niger Company, which controlled large areas of commerce along the Niger River. Over time, business interests turned into government authority, and Britain began expanding inland, signing treaties with local rulers, and sometimes using military force to secure control. In the north, powerful states such as the Sokoto Caliphate were brought under British influence after military campaigns in the early 1900s. In the west and south, kingdoms and communities also faced pressure. Some rulers resisted, others negotiated, but gradually, British authority spread across the region. By the early 20th century, Britain had established formal colonial rule over most of the territory. In 1914, British administrator Frederick Lugard merged the northern and southern protectorates into one political unit. This union created modern Nigeria, though the name had been suggested earlier by journalist Flora Shaw. The merging was done mainly for administrative convenience and economic balance, not because the different regions shared a single identity. For adults, this highlights how colonial boundaries often ignored cultural and historical differences. For children, it means that many different groups were placed together under one government, even though they had different languages and traditions. The British governed using a system called indirect rule. Instead of removing all traditional leaders, they worked through local chiefs and emirs, allowing them to maintain authority as long as they followed colonial policies. In the north, this system fit more easily because centralized leadership structures already existed. In parts of the south, where some communities had republican systems without kings, the British sometimes appointed warrant chiefs, which caused tension and resistance. This system shaped how power worked in Nigeria for decades. Western education expanded mostly in the southern regions, largely through Christian missionary schools. Literacy increased, and new professions emerged, including teachers, clerks, and lawyers. Railways and roads were built to move goods from inland areas to the coast, mainly to benefit export trade. Cities such as Lagos grew into important administrative and commercial centers. For adults, these developments show economic transformation linked to colonial priorities. For children, it means new schools were built, trains began moving across the land, and cities became busier and more modern. However, colonial rule also created inequalities. Economic policies favored certain regions and crops. Political power was centralized under British authority. Many Nigerians felt excluded from decision-making in their own land. As education spread, a new generation began questioning foreign rule. Newspapers, political organizations, and labor unions started demanding change. By the 1940s and 1950s, nationalist movements gained strength. Leaders such as Nnamdi Azikiwe, Obafemi Awolowo, and Ahmadu Bello emerged as powerful voices calling for self-government. Political parties formed along regional lines, reflecting the diversity within the country. Negotiations with Britain gradually increased Nigerian participation in governance, and constitutions were revised to allow more local control. After decades of colonial administration, economic restructuring, social change, and growing nationalist pressure, independence became inevitable. On October 1, 1960, British rule officially ended, and Nigeria became a self-governing nation within the Commonwealth. For both adults and children, this period teaches that colonialism reshaped Nigeria's borders, politics, and economy. But it also sparked movements for unity and self-determination. British colonization left a complex legacy. It introduced modern infrastructure, formal education systems, and centralized administration. Yet it also created divisions and challenges that would influence Nigeria's future. By 1960, the era of colonial rule had closed, and a new chapter, self-rule and nation-building, was ready to begin. And this is where we pause part 1 of our journey through the history of Nigeria. We have walked through ancient civilizations, powerful empires, the pain of the slave trade, and the long years of British colonization. We have seen kingdoms rise, cultures flourish, borders drawn, and a nation slowly shaped by history. But the most dramatic chapters are still ahead. In the next part, we step into independence in 1960, when hope filled the air, and a new nation was born. We witnessed the tension that led to the Nigerian Civil War, a conflict that tested unity and survival. We explored decades of military rule and the oil boom, where wealth and power reshaped the country in unexpected ways. Then we enter the era of modern democracy, from 1999 to the present, where challenges remain, but resilience grows stronger. And finally, we uncover Nigeria's global cultural impact, from Nollywood to Afrobeats, from literature to innovation. The story is about to become more intense, more emotional, and more powerful. If you want to see how Nigeria survived war, overcame dictatorship, and rose to become Africa's giant, subscribe, like, share, and comment. Turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next chapter. Because the next chapter is where the struggle turns into strength and where history becomes destiny.